First of all, welcome. John McDonnell is coming later, I think, is he?
Yeah.
John McDonnell being on late, looking forward to hearing. And you've got the papers and describe a little bit of what they're doing, and there's some copies of their document, Euromaidan Programme, to the left, which we'll be likely to look at. But could we start by asking Volodymyr Ishchenko to speak first, followed by Zakar Popovich, and then we'll have discussion and questions. Okay, over to you.
Thank you for everyone who come here.
Can you all hear okay?
Yeah, so should I speak louder? Louder, okay. So that will be my view on and general depiction of what actually happened. There's actually some answer to the question, was it a revolution or was it a reaction? And I think it was neither, in fact. And I'll speak about the potential for revolution after the events which happened in Ukraine, and I'll speak about specifically about the very hotly discussed issue of the far-right Ukrainian nationalist participation in Euromaidan protests. I'll speak something about the opportunity for the left, as we both, and me and Zahar are activists and intellectuals in the left movement, although I'm not the part of that organization, but this commons journal social criticism together. And
a little bit loud.
And I'll end with some proposals of what actually the Western governments can do for Ukrainian people now, and what actually Western citizens can campaign to from their Western governments. So, first of all, what happened? It's undeniably happened a people's rebellion against the government with support from the actual part of the population, and I'll tell later which part, and under quite very weak control and often contested leadership by the parliamentary opposition parties. These were the Fatherland, Tymoshenko party, Udar party led by Vitaly Klitschko, boxer, and Svoboda, far-right, Ukrainian ultra-nationalist party. And which this rebellion and very weak leadership of this party led were involved quite heavy violent confrontation with the police and 4 main armed paramilitary groups at the final stages of the events, and this finally led to the change of the ruling elite, although this ruling elite is from the same ruling class. And when I speak about the People's Rebellion, it should be understood that Ukraine was quite differentiated in their support for Euromaidan. And you probably know that the majority of support came from the western and central Ukraine, including Kiev, the capital. And in the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, the support for Euromaidan was much less. It didn't have the majority support. And it actually continued till the final stages of the rebellion, although now the situation may be quite different because of the Russian intervention in Crimea. So it cannot be seen in this framework of against the government. It was more complicated. It was part of the people. It was geographically concentrated rebellion. And there are many talks about revolution now. Some people talk about national revolution, national meaning, anti-Russian and defending Ukrainian national sovereignty. Some people talk about bourgeois revolution, that finally the bourgeois class, national bourgeois, take control of the state and against the post-Soviet state bureaucracy. Some people talk about anti-colonial revolution, seeing modern Ukraine as still a colony for Russia. Some, even more actually, talk about the democratic revolution and meaning some democratic political changes in Ukraine. Unfortunately, I think the potential for transforming this rebellion into revolution, into radical change of social political institutions and structures is in fact probably it has very little chances, in my opinion. And I'll explain now why. So there is no actually potential to change anything in the social economic class structure of Ukrainian society, which is unequal capitalist society dominated by the so-called oligarchs, meaning basically the financial industrial groups are very closely connected to the state institutions, which provide them some competitive advantages against other capitalist groups. So the new government is which came after overthrowing Yanukovych government. It's the government in the interest of the oligarchs. The most probable winner of the coming presidential elections, which are scheduled for May 25, and according to the most recent polls, is Petro Poroshenko. Petro Poroshenko is one of the 100 richest people in Ukraine. He's a chocolate king. He's Petro Poroshenko. He's very famous for his confectionery business. Roshen brand is a brand for sweets, for chocolate, and so on. He was actually supporting the Orange Revolution 2004, and he was in the government of Viktor Yushchenko. But then he had also the position in the Yanukovych government later in 2012, and then he again changed positions and supported Euromaidan. Although why he has so large support now, it's precisely because of this constant change of positions and the voters in the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, which didn't support Euromaidan, they do not see him as a kind of this very one-sided politician, balloting only from other part of Ukraine. And another quite important thing that the new government, in the face of Russian intervention, they assigned at least two prominent oligarchs in Ukraine, Serhiy Taruta and Igor Kolomoisky, to be the governors of important industrial regions, Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk. And this is like an attempt to stand for the national unity. So showing that the best people who are coming from this region, and they see the best people as those who made billions of dollars. Now they have to stand before their property and to defend the national unity of Ukraine in the face of coming Russian intervention. Although by actually the population of these regions, these new assignments of the most richest people in Ukraine can be seen as assignment to giving direct power to the big bourgeoisie, to the capitalists, to the oligarchs who were exploiting them before. So that's quite again showing that the class nature of the new government is not changing. And in the face of the other various detrimental conditions, it may establish even more overt oligarchic phase. What about democratic changes and about their possibility? So the new government, actually the parliament, after they overthrew Yanukovych, they voted for the reinstating the constitution of the 2004. And the constitution of the 2004 was giving more powers to the parliament and less power to Yanukovych, to the president. And it can be seen like a more democratic constitution, but in fact it is not. For example, the parliament will be, according to this constitution, the parliament will be voted exclusively on the basis of party lists. Actually, the parties will propose lists of people who they suggest to the parliament, and they all will compete in one proportional district. So the number of MPs they get, it will depend on the percentage of the votes. And the problem is that this constitution doesn't give any, doesn't provide any mechanism of people's control over the composition of this party lists, which in Ukrainian situation will be selected with almost total power and total control from the party leadership. And it will depend only on the internal democracy within the parties, and in the case of Ukrainian parties, which are mainly electoral machines, except of some quite significant cases, for example, the Farad Svoboda. But for electoral machines, it's the party leadership which decides who will be included in the lists. And now, there is also another position when, for example, the MP would try to dissent from the faction. The parliamentary faction leadership might decide to exclude him from the faction, and it will automatically lead to the laws, his mandate, the parliament will be lost. He will be excluded from the parliament and replaced with another MP from the same list. So, under some favorable political conjuncture, it may lead to very well controlled parliament who will be very well tuned to pass the laws which are necessary for the party leadership, at least, and also by the executive power. And that was actually what happened on January 16 when the Yanukovych-controlled parliament rushed through the procedures, broke the constitution, and passed a package of 10 laws which restricted freedom of speech and restricted freedom of peaceful assemblies, and then it escalated, then it provoked escalation of violence afterwards. One of the demands which was raised by even louder. Yeah. One of the demands which was raised by Maidan movement was, and one of the most important problems which brought people to the streets, and one of the problems occupying a major place in the new government's plan of action, was about transparency and end of corruption. Thank you. And of course, this issue, it's usually it's connected to some like neoliberal ideology. It's usually liberals and neoliberals who speak about transparency, fight of corruption, and they see it as a kind of like solution to many of the problems. And the left should not, but the left should not ignore this issue. This is an important issue. But the problem is whether the corruption and non-transparent relations can be fought without challenging the root causes of the social problems. And the root causes for them are basically inequality, social inequality and the poverty. And the problem is that the new government plan of action is actually suggesting to increase inequality. This is a plan of action of austerity measures which will be demanded by IMF as a conditions of the very needed and urgent credits Ukrainian economy needs. So, for example, Ukraine has to pay like $50 billion till the end of this year, and they won't be able to pay them without some external source. And as usual, IMF is coming with a list of austerity measures. And the new government led by neoliberal economist Arseniy Yatsenyuk has already declared that they are ready to fulfill every requirement that IMF will demand on them. So some of these requirements, for example, they include increase of the pension age. They also include increase of the energy tariffs for the population, prices for the gas consumption. They include, at least in the plans, because it's still discussed and the ministries are still working on the plans of what can be saved and what exactly austerity we can impose on the people. They include the cancelling of many benefits or bonuses and so on. They also suggest to increase the load for the teachers in the school and for the lecturers in the universities. And that's quite a long list. And I'm saying just about the most important and challenging things. But in the essence, it's again that this is a blow to the poor parts of Ukrainian population, to the poor classes. And the poor class would take the burden of the economic crisis, not the oligarchs, who now receive even more power. And of course, this will not resolve the problems of inequality and poverty. It will only aggravate this problem. And in the end, we will not get the necessary social conditions to fight the non-transparency and corruption. Moreover, the oligarchs who are retaining the power, they are not actually interested in fighting corruption, because this close connection to the state was their competitive advantage. And now in the free trade zone, they would need it ever more. They would need ever more the state protectionism against the more powerful and more rich European corporations. I mean the free trade zone, which is now discussed between the European Union and Ukraine, which was previously the part of European Association Agreement. And yeah, this paradoxically anti-colonial revolution seems to be leading to ever more increased dependency of Ukrainian economy. And but was it if the potential for revolution is quite little, to my opinion, was it a kind of like right-wing coup d'etat then? It's another some extreme, which is, as far as I follow the Western media, it's quite popular among the pro-Russian writers, but also among some leftist writers as well. They see it, what happened in Ukraine is a right-wing coup, fascist coup, neo-Nazi coup. In fact, it was definitely not a coup. If we see a coup as a kind of like organized, armed seizure of power, planned and intended from above. This was the change of the elites happened in the result, as I said, of the people's rebellion. And the peoples on the street, on the Kiev Central Square, on Maidan, they were very weakly controlled by the politicians, by the parliamentary opposition. In many cases, the politicians were had necessity to convince the people to follow them, and in very many cases they were contested. For example, when they made the final agreement with Yanukovych on February 20, agreeing to put the next presidential elections in December this year, not February next year, to agree on some on the constitutional change, and and in principle allowing Yanukovych to rule for almost another year. So and these negotiations were mediated by European ministers of foreign affairs, particularly by Polish minister. And when the Polish minister came to Maidan, to so-called Council of Maidan, where mainly politicians were actually sitting, he was very emotional. He said that if you do not agree on this compromise, you will be all dead. But when they were, when the Ukrainian politicians were coming to the street to explain to the stage to explain this compromise to the crowd, they were good. The people in the street were not agreeing on that. And one of the crucial moments was then when one of the commander of the so-called self-defense of Maidan, paramilitary groups defending protesters from the police, he came to the stage and said that if Yanukovych is not resigned, is not going to resign till 10 a.m. till 10 a.m. next morning, we are going to take power, we are going to storm the governmental buildings, we are going to occupy them, and in the next few hours, Yanukovych escaped from his residence in quite evident, he was hurrying very much. So the movement on the streets was very loosely controlled, if controlled at all, by the people who came to the power. It was not a coup, it was a rebellion. But then, what about the fascism? What about the participation of the far rightists? That's a very tricky issue, and it should be discussed very carefully. Yeah, there are also very extreme positions on that. Some of the supporters of Maidan, they used to deny any participation or any meaningful, any significant participation of the far right in the Maidan protests. And on the other hand, the Russian media, for example, sees this as a kind of like, as I said, fascist or neo-Nazi coup, and presenting the Maidan as essentially a fascist movement. In fact, it was neither fascist movement, but nor it was purely peaceful, democratic, and liberal pro-European movement, as many liberal supporters would like to present it. Two major far-right forces were participating in Maidan. One of them was, as I said, Svoboda party, which in Ukrainian means freedom. And this is a parliamentary party, and they got over 10% in the elections of 2012, something like 2 years ago. They were established actually as their first original name was Social National Party of Ukraine, not to be called so overtly like National Social, but yeah, they reversed it. But still, they had some references to the Nazi symbols. They used like famous Wolf's Angle symbol, which was used by some SS divisions during the Second World War. And they were rebranded in 2004 as Svoboda, not to be so associated with social nationalism, but still they retain some ideological social nationalist wing within the party. And the right sector is another agent, and with quite uneasy relations with Svoboda. Right sector was is actually an umbrella coalition established specifically for Maidan between various far-right non-parliamentary groups. Some of them were more moderate, some of them were overt neo-Nazis. For example, Social National Assembly of Ukraine, Patriots of Ukraine, which are overt racists, which participated in the hate crimes, in attacks on the migrants, in arsoning the migrants' accommodation, and various things. Another quite obvious group, White Hammer, for example, again with some white supremacist references. And these are two quite different agents. So the question is to which extent they are fascists. It's again that's the question of labeling. And when the Russians are using this anti-fascist rhetorics, it's again become very much relative. So of course neither Svoboda nor dominant groups in the right sector, which is, I didn't say, the most important group in this umbrella coalition is so-called Trident, Trizub in Ukrainian, which are not like neo-Nazis, but more of still they are ultra nationalists, still they are far right. So it's actually the question is not about the actual labeling of them as fascists or not fascists, but what is more important, are they xenophobic? yes, they are. For example, Svoboda Party was their activists. They were quite frequently seen in making anti-Semitic speech, anti-Semitic writings. They have the ethnically exclusive membership in the party. They retain it only for Ukrainians. They suggest national ethnic quotas for the government. So Ukrainians must have 80% of positions in the government bodies. And so yeah, they are xenophobes. They are homophobic. They are radical nationalists. They refer to the legacy of so-called organization Ukrainian Nationalists and Ukrainian Insurrection Army, which had also very difficult history during the Second World War, but at least at the beginning of the Nazi invasion, they were ready to collaborate with the Nazis, hoping to create with their help an independent Ukrainian state. This hope was not realized, but still, until 1943, they didn't start an open rebellion against Nazi occupation, and only when the Nazis lost Stalingrad, only when they lost the Battle of Kursk, and only when it became so obvious that the Soviets are coming back to Ukraine and are going to liberate them, they created so-called UPA, Ukrainian Insurrection Army, which which is now in the nationalist historiography is presented as fighting against both Nazis and Soviets, but in reality they fought mostly the Soviets and much less with Nazis. And the Ukrainian far rights, of course, they refer very much to this legacy, and they see those nationalist groups of the Second World War who participated in ethnic cleansing of the Polish population in 1943 in Volodymyr, for example. They participated in the Holocaust. They see them as the heroes. And some liberals present them as not as fascist but national conservatives. But again, if, for example, the Triton, right, is ready to cooperate with overt neo-Nazi groups within this right sector coalition, that's somewhat more to the far right than like normal European conservatives would do. If they, for example, overtly reject so-called corrupt democracy, and if they overtly reject liberalism, and in one of the recent interviews, the press secretary of the right sector actually said that yes, we need to show Europe the right way to go. People in Europe, they live very bad. They don't go to church. They have LGBT rights and LGBT. You understand this as a perversion, right? And yeah, the traditional family and Christian values are under danger. So it's far more to the right than just normal moderate conservatives would do. And again, yes, I emphasize they cooperate with Nazis. So, yet they are radical, and yet they are far right, and yes, their ideology is anti-democratic and anti-liberal. Another question was what was actually their role in Euromaidan? And again, sometimes it's exaggerated and presented as Maidan was like something like crazy Nazi coup, and also often it is downplayed. And supporters of Maidan, liberal supporters of Maidan, they say that those far rights were just a small minority. In its essence, Maidan was a movement of pro-democratic, peaceful, multicultural, and so on. But again, the reality is much more complicated. Of course, the far right were not numerically dominant there. Of course, it would be crazy just to imagine that like hundreds of thousands of neo-Nazis are coming to the Kiev streets and produce all those movements. That's definitely not true, and that's definitely, if someone says he's either a very silly person or he's working for Kremlin. But what what is usually missed from this statement is that yes, the far right were not numerically chants and slogans. Famous now, for example, is glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. And the heroes, what was actually meaning the heroes of the nationalist struggle with the Second World War. Or glory to the nation, death to the enemies. Or Ukraine above everything, which is an overt adoption of Deutschland über alles. And this became kind of like things as hello, how are you? The quite frequent situation which everyone could see if used the central subway stations in Kiev. For example, when the group of young nationalists is coming to the subway, to the platforms, and start to chant glory to Ukraine, glory to the nation, just random people at the subway station going somewhere to the work or to the studies, they start to respond. Glory to the heroes, death to the enemies. So it is expected from them. This is mainstreaming. And before Maidan, these were the slogans of the far right were very effectively infiltrated into the self-defense structure, and they formed their own units within this self-defense. They were very important in the violent clashes with the police. They were the first clashes started not in January. They started on December the 1st, when the rioters tried to attack the presidential administration and had several hours confrontation with the police. But for the opposition was quite quick in dissociating themselves from this, as they called it, provocation, trying to retain the peaceful character of the movement, but still, and putting blame on some pro-governmental provocators who started the violence and so on. But in fact, if you look at the videos of what actually participated in that, of course there might be some provocators, but the majority who started, who were fighting with the police, these were the rightist activists, rightist militants. They may very eagerly join this, and we see this as a national revolution, what they were doing in Ukraine, their perception on Maidan. And they were also controlling some of the occupied buildings. The Kiev state administration was actually captured under the leadership of Svoboda, and then it was, in fact, managed by the Svoboda activists. And what that means actually, this was one of the major reasons why the Maidan movement against Yanukovych didn't become truly all-national. Because for eastern and southern regions where the Ukrainian national identity is much less strong, is less stronger, it's this radical Ukrainian nationalism was seen as a problem. It was not. It was pushing these other Ukrainian regions away from Maidan. And the things as we see now with the so-called pro-Russian rallies in Kharkiv, in Donetsk, in Petrovsk, in Odessa, in Crimea, they are, of course, Russia has some interest in provoking them, and they do provoke them. But there are also very many people who are genuinely opposing the far-right elements of Maidan and the far-right representatives in the new government. Another question, what actually the far-right actually gained? Did they become stronger? And yes, in fact, some of the positions in the new government were given to Svoboda representatives, and also quite high positions. The deputy prime minister is Svoboda representative, also minister of defense, minister of agriculture, minister of environment. Prosecutor General is from Svoboda. Also, some other ministers are not from Svoboda, but still they have nationalist background. For example, Andriy Parubik, who was the commander of self-defense structure on Maidan, and his political activity started with Social National Party of Ukraine. He was one of the founders of this party, and then he led its paramilitary wing, Patriot of Ukraine. Now he is not in Svoboda, he is in Tymoshenko party, but still he has this nationalist background. Serhiy Kvit, Minister of Education, was one of the middle rank officer in the Trident organization, although he, as far as I know, he left it many years ago. Tatiana Chernovil, a famous journalist, and they increased their visibility. They got the governmental positions. They got the resources which can be used in these positions, and now the far right is a normal part of Ukrainian politics. There is no any kind of like cordon sanitary cordon, which usually exists in many European countries, where the moderate right-wing parties do not actually cooperate with the far right. Now the far right is legitimate. Normal part of Ukrainian politics. And the right sector, they did not actually gain the official positions, but they gained an enormous respect as the people's heroes and the vanguard of the People's Rebellion. And they got their firearms, which they captured in the police departments in the western regions at the final stage of the confrontation. And they're not going to give it back to the state. In some councils, they actually try to interfere into the local council meetings, coming there with the machine guns, with other arms, and trying to impose their will. So yes, they become stronger. They got immense political and symbolic capital. They got the guns, and yes, they are dangerous. They are the carriers of dangerous ideologies. Dangerous to various minorities, dangerous to the trade union movement, dangerous to the leftist movement in Ukraine, dangerous to democracy. And now they have stronger resources, much more resources to promote these dangerous strategies. So, how much time do I have?
Well, how much more do you need?
Yeah, I'll save more time for the hard part. So, and I'll stop on some proposals.
Okay.
I'll leave this explanation about the left in Ukraine for the hard. Actually, have the slides about that. So, what actually in this situation, what can Western governments do for Ukraine? And for Ukrainian people, I mean, I'm not so much concerned about Ukrainian oligarchs. It's definite that a military intervention to Crimea or to other eastern and southern regions in response to Russian intervention would be an extremely bad idea. It would not be the Russians who would be seen in these regions as occupants and intervents. It would be the NATO or European American forces. They would be seen as occupants. So this military solution is actually could be a disaster. Although some effective sanctions against Russian officials can and should be implemented, like freezing their accounts, which they have in the Russian banks, in European banks, or confiscating their property in the European Union, it can be done. I'm not sure about the legality of these actions, but they could be quite efficient. Another point, the West is ready to give quite large credits to Ukraine, and if to calculate them and to sum them up to something over $30 billion. But they are given under conditions of neoliberal austerity, which would only aggravate the problems that the Ukrainian population has now. What can be done without these conditions of neoliberal austerity? For example, the West could write off Ukrainian foreign debt. which is approximately $75 billion. It has various sources, but this position, which is a demand, which is actually raised up by many progressive movements in the world, demanding to write off the debt of third world poor countries, it can be applied to Ukraine. Why the Ukrainian people have to pay for the debts of the previously authoritarian Ukrainian governments? And the financial support for Ukrainian state can be given not on the conditions of neoliberal austerity, but on the conditions of real democratization, on implementing some mechanisms and institutions of civic control of the government, of some institutions of participatory democracy, some control over the party lists, for example, which will compete on the elections. The Western governments could take a very strong position against the far-right participation in the government, up to demanding, up to not giving any credits until these guys are in the government and until they are representing the Ukrainian state. And then the last proposal, which would actually increase enormously support for EU and decrease support for Russian intervention, would be a visa-free regime for Ukraine. If immediately established. Because in fact there were only two obstacles which Ukraine didn't fulfill for further visa liberalization process. One of them was the law on biometric passports, which have to include this biometric information, fingerprints and so on. Ukrainian passports are still much more simple. And another one was the non-discrimination law, which was actually not supported even by the so-called pro-European parties, because it involved the statement that LGBT people cannot be discriminated on the jobs and in other places. So Voda particularly was campaigning against this law. And they were afraid of losing the electorate in quite conservative Ukrainian society. And yes, and now they are critically saying that they are for European values. But still, a quick and immediate decision on visa-free regime would create a very efficient motive for people in eastern southern regions, even in Crimea, to stay with Ukraine. Because then they will gain the opportunity to travel to Ukraine, to retain their jobs, which they had illegally, and the level of labor migration from Ukraine to EU is estimated in millions. Many of Ukrainians are working in Poland, in Italy, in Spain, and Portugal, and many of them are coming actually from Western Ukraine. And when they were campaigning for Euromaidan, they were not campaigning just for some European utopia. They were also campaigning for the free access to their jobs, because they don't have jobs in their own native regions. These Western Ukrainian regions are quite poor, less urbanized, and with deteriorated industry. So these are the things which the Western governments could do now for Ukrainian people, and for which the European citizens can campaign for, and pressing on putting these demands to the governments to help Ukrainian people. So stop now. Thank you for attention.